Out of fuel and no runway in sight, this plane is going down in the water.
I was definitely underwater, and the aircraft was rolling to the left.
There were bodies, there were people on the floor in the galley.
A routine flight out of New York slams down in the Hudson River.
At this point, I'm thinking this can't be happening to me.
A 767 hijacked, violently forced into the ocean. The most dramatic ditching ever caught on camera.
The plane was like tumbling or something. I said, that's it, I'm dead.
In the next hour, life and death ordeals in pilots' and passengers' own words.
The captain just said, brace for impact.
Dramatic animations that put you right at the terrifying scenes. An in-depth investigation into why some pilots make the risky decision to put their planes down in the water and how they live to tell the story. When U.S. Airways Flight 1549 went down in the Hudson River, surveillance cameras were only able to capture these remote images of the landing. It's hard to see what really happened. Now, you're looking at the so-called miracle on the Hudson as you've never seen it before. This is a detailed animation of a flight in trouble. In the aviation industry, it's known as ditching, putting a plane down in the water due to an emergency. It's what happens when the nearest open space is not a runway, not even a stretch of open field or a highway, but a body of water. In the case of U.S. Airways Flight 1549, the Hudson River in New York City. Just 6 minutes before the world-famous splashdown, Flight 1549 is cleared for taxi and takeoff at New York's LaGuardia Airport. First Officer Jeffrey Skiles is at the controls. He's new to the Airbus. For the past 8 years, he's flown a Boeing 737.
Well, the takeoff was uneventful. It was a nice day. It was cold. And this was only my second trip on the airplane, so I was actually hand flying the airplane to get used to it. And about 3,000 feet, we, flew into the birds.
The plane has been in the air less than 3 minutes when it collides with a flock of Canada geese, crippling both engines.
This is Cactus 1539. Hit birds to lost thrust on both engines, returning back towards LaGuardia.
Okay, you need to return to LaGuardia. Turn left heading up 220. Stop your departures. Got emergency returning.
Captain Chesley Sully Sullenberger takes control of the airplane from his co-pilot with 2 simple words: my aircraft. Remarkably, there is footage of the plane's last moments airborne.
Sully took over control of the airplane and called for the dual engine failure checklist that we do, and I started to perform that.
Trying to get the engines restarted.
Yes.
Was there any luck at all?
No. The engines have to be in a certain start envelope, we call it, to start, and that usually is predicated on you going a lot faster.
Captain Sullenberger has nearly 20,000 hours of flight time under his belt, so it doesn't take long for him to do the math and realize at their altitude and rate of descent, it's too risky to try to glide all the way to an airport over such a densely packed area. It's now 3:28 p.m. Flight 1549 has less than 2 minutes until impact. Air traffic controllers, at times using the wrong flight number, try and guide the plane to an airport.
Cactus 1529. We can get it for you. Do you want to try to land runway 13?
We're unable. We may end up in the Hudson.
Hi, Cactus 1549. It's going to be left traffic to runway 31.
Unable.
Just north of the George Washington Bridge, the captain aligns the Airbus A320 with the Hudson River. He passes the bridge just to the east and continues due south.
I looked out the window, saw we were actually below the rooftops of Manhattan. I said, this is not a good sign. We're not making Newark.
Did Sully look at you and say we're going in the water, or did you both come to the realization that's where this was going?
I think it was just the only option we had. There was no, we weren't going to make it to an airport, and that was the only open spot that we saw.
If a pilot is forced to ditch, the FAA has recommendations for how to do so. It all comes down to wind and waves or swells.
In a perfect world, how would you land on the waves?
Depending on the wind and water, I would always want to land parallel to the swells. So if your waves are coming this way, you want to land on the top. You never ever want to be able into, and this is what's called a cross swell, where you're perpendicular into the water this way.
What might happen?
If you land into the face of the swell, you could actually flip over like this. That's not a good thing.
Another potential hazard that could have spelled disaster for Flight 1549, coming down with one wing higher than the other.
The airplane could have cartwheeled, and that would have been very violent and significantly lessened the opportunity to get everybody out as well as they did.
Cactus 1529, turn right 280. You can land on runway 1 at Teterboro.
We can't do it.
Okay, which runway would you like at Teterboro?
We're going to be in the Hudson.
The captain just said, brace for impact. Help. And everyone started saying prayers, just kind of looking at each other, not knowing what to say, what to do.
At 3:30 p.m., with wing flaps and slats extended to help slow the plane down, Flight 1549 is about to splash down in the Hudson River.
As you watch this unfold, everything's just about right. I mean, it's slow, the nose is up, wings are level, and they've got the good fortune of it being fairly calm.
We didn't know if we were hitting water, if we were hitting land, which was what we were better off. And then, you know, the impact hitting the water was just, you know, the most tremendous impact you could imagine.
All 155 people on board survive. From bird strike to touchdown, the entire incident lasts just 3.5 minutes. Not enough time to get through the dual engine failure checklist, much less a ditching checklist. Also, not enough time to enable what's called the ditch switch, a valve that effectively seals the plane and allows it to float longer. You're not sinking, you're alive. Was there an exhilaration or was there still an adrenaline going on?
I'm sure there was an adrenaline rush, I guess. When we went to the hospital, and 4 hours later, my blood pressure was, I think, 160 over 100, which is, you know, I'm normally a 120 over 70 guy. So obviously there was something going on physiologically that I didn't understand at the time.
I am terrific. This is the best day ever.
A lot of things went our way.
What kind of things went your way?
Apparently there are swells a lot on the Hudson. It was completely flat that day. And we happened to land right where the ferries go from New Jersey to Manhattan, so that they were right there. They were able to come and rescue us. Other than hitting the birds, everything went our way that day.
When we come back, bird versus engine. A graphic demonstration shows the startling damage even a small bird can do to an 84-ton jet. And Flight 1549 is not the first commercial jet to be put down in the water. There have been others, some just as successful, others tragically not. In the wake of the ditching of U.S. Airways Flight 1549, a lot of people wondered how a flock of 10-pound birds could incapacitate a jet with a takeoff weight of nearly 170,000 pounds. How could that be? The answer, as large and powerful as jet engines are, they're also surprisingly delicate. This incredible video was shot during a bird strike test run by aircraft engine manufacturer Pratt & Whitney. The birds are dead before the test begins. Watch as the carcasses get shredded as they collide with a turbofan engine. Not a pretty sight. But the engine doesn't fare much better, with permanent damage to its hollow titanium fan blades.
When a large bird goes in, it damages the compressor in the front of the airplane. And those blades that break, they just cascade through the rest of the engine.
Ladies and gentlemen, the bang you heard was not our original problem. There was a large eagle on the runway.
Bird strikes are a lot more common than you might think. According to the FAA, there are at least 20 bird strikes a day across the U.S. The problem costs the aviation industry more than $2 billion a year. And since 1988, bird strikes have resulted in more than 200 deaths nationwide. Fortunately, there were no human fatalities in the bird strike that forced Flight 1549 into the water. But not all ditchings go that smoothly. Some run into a perfect storm of problems. Imagine a pilot ends up over the Caribbean Sea, out of fuel, out of options, and soon into the ocean. That's the tragic story of ALM Flight 980. But what went so wrong? May 2nd, 1970, in a partnership between two now defunct charter airlines, Dutch carrier ALM and American carrier Overseas National Airlines, ALM Flight 980 is set to leave New York's JFK Airport at 11 a.m. 57 passengers and 6 crew members are on board.
It was a beautiful spring day. Temperatures were in the 60s, scattered clouds, light winds. It was a beautiful day in New York.
Flight 980's destination, the Caribbean, Juliana Airport in St. Martin. Pilots say it's one of the trickiest places in the world to land a plane, especially a 747, as this video shows. The postage stamp-sized runway is perilously close to a beach. Aside from physical limitations of the runway, there's also a mountain range blanketing one side of the airport. And if all that isn't enough, there's that unpredictable Caribbean weather. All those factors combined are about to turn a routine flight into a nightmare. For the first time after 4 decades, the pilot of that flight, Captain Ballsy DeWitt, is telling his dramatic story on American television.
As far as an accident being a chain of events, this definitely was it.
On the ground, Captain DeWitt says he confirms he has enough fuel to make it not only to his destination, but also to an alternate airport in case of a diversion, standard for all commercial flights. He goes through his equipment checklist and discovers the cockpit's PA system isn't working, but that's not required. At 11:14 a.m., the flight is cleared for takeoff. The DC-9 is designed for short, frequent flights. At nearly 1,700 miles, the route from New York to St. Martin will stretch this aircraft to its limit. As the flight heads south, the weather begins to deteriorate. Captain DeWitt is told visibility at the St. Martin Airport is below the minimum standard required for landing. He elects to divert to nearby San Juan, Puerto Rico. But 13 minutes later, San Juan Air Traffic Control Center tells him St. Martin Tower wants to talk to him.
So I picked up and I tried to get hold of San Martin. I got hold of San Martin Tower, and all they did was start giving me fairly good weather, 1,500 broken, etc., which was well above the minimums I needed. I did question them, where did the report come from that you were below minimums? I elected then to refile for San Martin, my original destination, which I did.
But as these dramatic animations illustrate, contrary to the information Captain DeWitt says he was given, the weather is terrible. He attempts to land the plane anyway, burning massive quantities of fuel in the process.
Visibility was poor, it was raining, and because of those conditions, he had to stay in closer to the airport and to the runway than he would normally have liked to have done. So the first attempt was unsuccessful.
So I lined it up with the runway, and I took my second circular round.
Now on the second attempt, the winds were starting to shift, and he was unable to line it up for a landing. So he decided to go around again. On the third attempt, the same conditions existed. However, by now, the winds had shifted 180 degrees. Now he had a tailwind. Because he had a tailwind, he was too high on the approach.
So at that point, I told my crew, tell the tower I'm going to my alternate.
Calculations showed that they would make it just barely. They were legal by their calculations, but there wasn't much extra. In hindsight, it's easy to sit and say, well, they should have stopped in Bermuda or they should have stopped on the way down in San Juan. The moment that they missed the runway, it went from fuel critical to a full fuel emergency.
When we come back, out of fuel, out of time, and in the water.
I was definitely underwater. and the aircraft was rolling to the left.
May 2nd, 1970. Bad weather, low visibility, and lack of fuel. Captain Ballsy DeWitt has no choice but to ditch his plane in the Caribbean Sea. No footage exists of this incident, but our dramatic animation shows what the plane might have looked like as it slammed into those turbulent waters. Here's how the pilot describes what it felt like to be in the cockpit at that life and death moment.
My first contact with the water was quite smooth, and it wasn't too long after that the rest of the airplane was starting to make contact with the water, starting to get a heavy drag, that an extreme amount of vibration in the cockpit. The instrument panel was vibrating so that I couldn't even read it.
But how did this flight end up in such a dire situation? After failing to land at St. Martin's Juliana Airport in bad weather, Captain DeWitt decides to divert, first to the nearby island of St. Thomas, then to St. Croix, when he finds out it's even closer. But as the plane is climbing away from the airport in a torrential downpour, there's a problem.
My navigator said to me, "Ballsy, my God, look at the fuel gauges."
Because of the wind, the turbulence, and the conditions, the airplane was rocking back and forth as it was climbing. The fuel totalizer was spinning.
Yeah, I told him not to worry about it because I considered it was probably being low on fuel to begin with, the turbulence is sloshing up and down the tanks might cause this.
But at 6,500 feet, warning lights indicating low fuel pressure illuminate, and Captain DeWitt knows just how grave this situation has become.
He talks to the controller, how far are we from St. Thomas? I got 5 minutes of fuel, I'm not going to make St. Thomas.
I briefed the crew that we will keep going to St. Croix, but we were going to set up for a possible ditching. It's dark, it's overcast, it's raining, and the sea is very angry. A lot of white caps, the swells were quite enormous, and I had heavy winds.
All of Captain DeWitt's years of experience are about to come into play. As he descends, he eyeballs the 10 to 15-foot waves and chooses one, knowing full well he has to land on top of it rather than into it, or the plane could break into pieces. Time of impact, 3:49 p.m. Unlike U.S. Airways Flight 1549, which skimmed across the top of the Hudson River, this plane bobs in and out of the waves. Incredibly, Captain DeWitt says the plane continues to function while in the water.
The aircraft was rolling to the left and was in already a high degree bank, well beyond 30 to 35 degrees. All I did was start flying it like I would in the air, and it rolled out level, and the minute it rolled out level, I sort of popped to the surface just like a cork.
Not all have survived the impact, but those who do escape into shark-infested waters. It's an hour and a half before rescue helicopters begin arriving on the scene. Because the plane's PA system was not working, the pilot never had a chance to verbally warn passengers to put on their seatbelts or brace for impact. 40 of 63 survived. According to the NTSB, fewer lives would have been lost had passengers received adequate warning. Of the 23 who don't make it, 2 are children. To this day, it's difficult for the pilot to come to terms with the loss of life.
Well, the story itself, not very difficult, except if I let my mind wander to the people I lost. Yeah. No, the 2 kids I lost back there.
The final NTSB report on ALM 980, issued nearly a year later in March 1971, reveals a laundry list of all that went wrong that day. Quote, "The probable cause of this accident was fuel exhaustion, which resulted from continued unsuccessful attempts to land at St. Martin until insufficient fuel remained to reach an alternate airport. Other factors: reduced visibility, a condition not reported to the flight."
I think the biggest thing was that they kept thinking that they would make it, and they kept doing the planning and realizing increasingly that they weren't going to. The airplane, after its second approach into St. Martin, was fuel critical. And to allow a jet to get to be in that fuel critical a state is an error on the part of the crew.
There's one thing in this accident that cannot be taken away from me, and I will not let anybody take it away from me. That's the responsibility. I take that. I wore the 4 stripes. I made all the decisions. Somewhere along the line, I should have been sharp enough to know, regardless, to get myself into a situation like that. And to this day, I still haven't found where I could have done anything better.
Captain DeWitt was fired from his job 6 weeks after the ditching. He says no official reason was given. He never flew as a pilot again. Coming up next, terrorism in the skies and another dramatic ditching. This one actually caught on camera. When a commercial jet has to make an emergency landing, the hope is to find a nearby runway. But that's not always possible. Sometimes, in a dire situation, ditching a plane in a body of water is the only choice. We've been reporting nail-biting stories of planes that had to do just that. Amazingly, what's often described as a terrifying life-or-death experience for passengers doesn't even seem to faze the men in the cockpit.
But there was no fear factor. I had no problems with the crew. Everybody was with me.
You know, we had things to do, and I think that makes a big difference. I've always felt that certainly the flight attendants and passengers in back would have had a lot more fear than us because they had nothing to do.
Water ditchings are rare, but there have been several more than just Flight 1549 and ALM 980. January 2002, a Boeing 737, operated by Garuda Indonesia Airways, flies into severe thunderstorms, and both engines flame out. After 3 unsuccessful attempts to restart them, the pilot ditches in a shallow section of an Indonesian river. 59 on board survive. 1 flight attendant drowns. August 2005, an ATR-72 turboprop fitted with the wrong fuel gauge runs out of fuel and ditches in the Mediterranean Sea off the coast of Sicily. 16 of 39 on board are killed. 7 airline employees, including mechanics, executives, the pilot, and co-pilot, received prison sentences of up to 10 years. More than half a century ago, there was another ditching, and amazingly, the entire incident is caught on camera. The old Coast Guard film is startling, but it doesn't tell the whole story. This graphic animation shows what it might have looked like if you'd been in the middle of the Pacific Ocean on October 16, 1956, watching Pan Am Flight 943 go down in open water. The images are eerily similar to the so-called Miracle on the Hudson, U.S. Airways Flight 1549, but there are also some major differences.
It's open ocean, so it's going to be significantly more difficult than, say, a river, just because of the swells and so forth. The differences is that they had hours to plan this. The Hudson River crew only had a couple of minutes.
Pan Am Flight 943 leaves Honolulu, Hawaii with 31 people on board and 44 crates of canaries in the cargo hold. Known as the Sovereign of the Skies, the Boeing 377 Stratocruiser, a long-range post-war airliner, is bound for San Francisco. This is footage of that actual flight filmed by the Coast Guard. Joanne Marzioli is on board.
It was a month before my 3rd birthday. I was with my mother. We were returning to the Bay Area from the Philippines, and my mother was very anxious to get back to California to see my father.
But the reunion would be dramatically delayed. Several hours into the flight, nowhere near land, the plane is climbing to 21,000 feet when one of its 4 engines begins to overspeed, its normal hum now becoming a deafening scream. It's the middle of the night and pitch black over the Pacific.
They had a problem with the propeller, and they created so much drag that they were doing okay with it for a while, and then they ended up having another engine problem that the second engine couldn't sustain the high power. It would be an unbelievable set of circumstances.
2 engines that should be moving the plane forward are now holding it back. It's like driving a car with the emergency brake on. The plane won't make it to San Francisco or back to Hawaii. The pilot, Captain Richard Ogg, quickly determines he has no choice but to ditch in the Pacific.
My mother mentioned that she didn't hear any yelling or screaming. She did hear a lot of praying in different languages. The mood was very, very serious.
The pilot radios a nearby Coast Guard cutter for assistance, and a plan is formed. The Stratocruiser will circle above the ship for the rest of the night, lightening its fuel load and waiting for daybreak.
You want to be as light as you can because with less weight you can go slower and fly it more slowly, so the impact with the water is going to be lessened. But also you want to do it with daylight because it improves your depth perception. You're going to be able to put the airplane into the water with a better judgment of exactly how high above the water you are. And that's going to increase the likelihood of having survivors.
Despite a well-thought-out plan, it is an incredibly dangerous situation. And just like the pilots in our other stories, Captain Ogg is remarkably calm, even managing to provide some comic relief, suggesting passengers light their cigarettes and relax.
I mean, here he is. He's in a situation where he's going to have to ditch the plane, and yet he's able to joke like that. He seems to me to be very calm and have his sensibilities about him, which, if you have to have a pilot who's going to ditch a plane, you'd want a pilot who has his senses about him.
The plane remains aloft for nearly 5 hours, operating on 2 of its 4 engines. By morning, conditions are more conducive to ditching. The water is calm. It's a warm 74 degrees. A Coast Guard camera records the scene from below as flight attendants prepare the passengers above, telling them to remove their shoes, tighten their seatbelts, put out their cigarettes, and put on their life vests. The pilot has the crew move all passengers to seats in the front of the cabin.
He was probably worried that the tail would break off, and if that was the case, then he wanted to make sure we were all safe in the front of the plane.
There's a 10-minute warning, a 1-minute warning, and then 3 simple words from the pilot. This is it. The plane splashes down at a speed of 103 miles per hour. The impact is brutal. The plane whips around, its tail snapping off, just as the captain had predicted.
When it hit the water, it jarred me apart from my mother, and I slid from under her legs and just slid under the chair. So that was very scary for my mother. I think that was the one time where she did let out a sound, where she did probably scream, "Where's my child?"
The Coast Guard crew is convinced no one could have survived this. But then, movement. Within seconds, the front doors are thrown open and life rafts thrown out. In the midst of chaos, Joanne is handed off to a Coast Guardsman and then reunited with her mother. Another moment caught on camera.
When I saw myself being lifted up out of the life raft by one of the Coast Guards, I could picture them just smiling and just being really loving. And then seeing myself on the video put my arm around one of the Coast Guards, when I saw my mother looking at me, and I reached out for her, to see my mother on the video and to see that stressed look. I gotta say that just really made me think about what happened and what she had to go through.
Captain Ogg is the last person off the plane, which sinks 21 minutes after hitting the water. The only casualties, the 3,300 canaries in the cargo hold. Miraculously, all 31 people on board survive.
I feel like it's such a miracle. All of us that survived now have lives, and we're able to create lives.
It's a rarity for commercial jets to end up in the water. When they do, passengers rely on a combination of luck, skill, and good judgment in the cockpit.
Experience is something you can never buy, and you don't need it often, but when you do, there's no substitute for it.
Still to come, a ditching not caused by birds, weather, or mechanical failure. This is the work of terrorists, and the deadly ordeal is caught on camera.
The reply from the pilot, we don't have enough fuel. The response from the hijackers, we don't care.
What you're looking at is the most dramatic, most violent ditching ever caught on camera. It's a Boeing 767 slamming down in the Indian Ocean off the east coast of Africa. Unlike the other ditchings we've seen, this one was not caused by mechanical failure, not by weather, or even a bird strike. As perilous as those situations were, at least those pilots were able to do their jobs without having to wrestle terrorists in the cockpit.
That captain was under a different kind of stress than we've seen in these others.
Absolutely. He not only had the issues of having to put the airplane in the water, he had people on board that were trying to kill the airplane and everybody on board with it, including himself.
It's November 23rd, 1996. Ethiopian Airlines Flight 961 from Ethiopia's capital to Nairobi, Kenya, should be a routine 2-hour flight. It turns out to be anything but. The pilot, Captain Leou Abate, sat with documentary filmmaker Salim Amin, whose father Mo was killed in the crash. In the cockpit of a Boeing 767 simulator, Captain Abate relives the hellish flight.
So they came into the cockpit. How many of them?
There were 3 of them. They took the fire extinguisher and they started beating the co-pilot. Go out, go out. I said, guys, hold on, what's going on? He said, shut up. The flight is hijacked. Okay.
Claiming to have a bomb, the hijackers demand to be flown to Australia.
Okay, guys, I told them, this flight is destined to Nairobi. We don't carry enough fuel to Australia. Let's land in Nairobi. We refuel, and then we can go to Australia. Otherwise, I told them it's impossible.
The hijackers refused to allow Captain Abate to refuel at cities along his route. They want him to fly out over the water toward Australia. The pilot knows that's a losing proposition, so he hugs the coast.
Then he said, why are you flying along the coast? Australia is somewhere to this direction. And I told him, okay. I turned the heading. And now this message came, fuel, low fuel.
Almost out of fuel, the plane approaches the Comoros Islands off Africa's east coast. As the plane descends, the hijackers fight the pilot for control of the plane.
I said, guys, this is finished now. We are all dead people now. Let me do it my way. And he said, I don't know how they did it. He disengaged the autopilot.
Disengaged it?
He did.
From this control?
Yeah, from that control.
Right.
Then I disconnected the autopilot. Then I had to start flying it myself.
In the cabin, passengers start to panic.
When the pilot first made the announcement that the plane was out of fuel in one engine and running out in the other, the plane just broke into pandemonium, and then we heard passengers in the back who panicked, and they all inflated their life jackets. They all put them on and inflated them.
So you could hear this happen?
You hear a little pop, 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 pop.
In the cockpit, Captain Abate tries as hard as he can to put the plane he nicknamed Zulu down safely onto the water.
Okay, you have to hold it, hold it, hold it. Okay, Zulu, now you're going to make it. Now you'll make it.
The 767 is traveling at about 200 miles an hour, far too fast to ditch safely. But there's an even more serious problem. As this incredible video shows, the wings are not level, a dangerous angle for ditching. Watch as the left wing drags along the water with disastrous results.
They catch the left wing first. You'll actually see it come off. He's fighting to control the airplane. The engine hits, it's shedding parts, and then It actually pretty well rolls over as it sheds both wings. And if he had been able to hit a little bit more wings level, the chances of survival would have gone up. The biggest problem with this ditching is the fact that they catch that left wing.
One can only imagine the pandemonium inside the airplane. Survivors report feeling a series of increasingly violent impacts.
The plane first hit the water, and it was quite gentle. Then there was a hard bump. And the third one was like 60 mile an hour, worst thing you've ever felt kind of thing. And then it was getting progressively worse, and the plane was like tumbling or something. And I said, that's it, I'm dead.
Of 175 passengers and crew, 125 perish, including all 3 hijackers. Some victims are standing at the time of impact and are violently thrown to their deaths. Many die because they disregard safety instructions and inflate their life jackets while still inside the plane. As the cabin fills with water, they're pushed up against the ceiling and drown. But as tragic an outcome as it is, it could have been even worse.
The fact that some people survived, is it good, heroic piloting, or were there mistakes made here?
Were there mistakes? You can Monday morning quarterback this and say, well, they could have done this better, they could have done that better. But under the conditions that they faced, I'd say this crew did pretty well.
When we come back, how do young pilots prepare for future gut check moments? I'm about to find out for myself.
Good.
We're down.
There, that's it. You're in the water.
We're down. Okay.
Away from him, whereas that's the view that we'll have. We'll be able to see and talk to assets that are, hundreds of miles away, whereas a pilot is just going to be able to see something and talk to someone within a much shorter distance than what we can do.
We are responsible for really prioritizing when it comes to weapons, sensors, and fuel. So that allows us to have an opportunity to really think battle management-wise and really putting a lot of these smaller puzzle pieces together to create this larger picture.
There are times where, when I was deployed, we did have the opportunity to kind of hear some of the stuff that was going on the ground. So when you can hear the troops on the ground actually running for their life, and you're trying to direct an aircraft in there to help pull them out and get them out as quick as possible, that kind of gives you a purpose as to what you're doing there. It lets you know that you're not just there, for no reason. You do have a purpose.
I think there are so many keys to success. It's the speed, it's the power, it's everything that goes on behind the scenes. So from the maintenance crew to everybody that works on the flight line. Obviously, I don't know the first thing about being in the cockpit of an F-22, but from my short time in the Air Force, I think it's just all about relationships and communication. If you can trust the people that you're working hand in hand with, then you're set up for success there. If you're holding yourself accountable day in and day out, then you know you're going to set those expectations and you're going to push yourself to the level that you need to in order to be successful for not only yourself, but for the team you're working for.
The F-22 is agile, fast, and stealthy, but none of these capabilities matter if we can't get it off the ground. And the airmen who work around the clock to make sure these jets are ready to fly know that the end result is worth every drop of sweat. Is that good? Yeah?
That motor swap is just kicking off us all day. And about time to leave, we're like, we spend all day trying to get it done. We're not just gonna walk out now. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of like you let the job beat you in a way. That's what I like about this job. It's you take a lot of pride in your work and your jet.
To me, a maintainer is.
Can I be arrogant about it? Your flight line handyman.
Not like a grease monkey,
You got an 18, 19-year-old airman, male or female, who is given a $187 million airplane, one of the most sophisticated airplanes in the Air Force arsenal.
The backbone of the Air Force. I think so, entirely.
Is that a metal door or a composite? I think you just tap it on you one, they all sound the same.
Nah, I think that's better.
Think so? What's your proof on that?
It sounds
I'll show you how you know.
So I'm still learning. I have a lot to learn. I'm the class I came in with, we're still the new guys, you know, so we're trying to, you know, gain our respect on the flight line, you know, earn our position, you know. So that's about where we're at right now. You know, we're still trying to get in, you know, wiggle our way in.
I mean, we have a lot of 3 levels and a lot of 5 levels in AMU who are really just working way above what they should be asked to do, and they're succeeding greatly, learning a lot, but also performing at a high level.
Surviving the flight line is about having snacks.
These airmen are better trained, better equipped, better resourced than it was when I come in. And you know, the airmen are a lot smarter when I come in.
A lot of these airmen out here are 3 levels and 5 levels with, you know, less than 5 years of experience out here, many new to the jet. So it's really eye-opening.
Yes, so I was right.
But that's how you can tell.
Maintainers like Airman Williams are key to unlocking the capabilities of the F-22. Perhaps the one thing, though, that sets it aside from all the other jets in the sky right now is its Super Cruise capability. The Raptor can fly at supersonic speeds without using its afterburners, making this jet insanely efficient. Now, even though it gets great MPGs, it's still hungry. To fuel this bad boy up for one mission, it can take up to 2,500 gallons of fuel, and that could take a lot of time. But thanks to fuels technicians on the ground, they can get a pilot gassed up and back into the fight in as little as 20 minutes, thanks to hot pit refueling.
I'm Technical Sergeant Anthony Morris, and I'm the NCIC of Fuels Distribution for the Fuels flight here at Tyndall Air Force Base. When it comes to hot pit refueling, I see us as the most significant. Of course, you got to have the maintenance guys to fix it, you know, and the crew chiefs to kind of take care of it. And the pilot can't drop bombs. I mean, he has to drop the bombs, but just like a car, you can have all the best maintenance on it in the world, but if you run out of gas, you're not driving. Basically, a hot pit refueling cuts sortie time regeneration in half, sometimes by about 70%. If we're in a wartime situation or any other situation where we got to get aircraft back airborne to be able to go do their mission wherever they're needing to go, we fuel aircraft with engines running. They pull up, they're allowed to receive fuel and go right back out onto the runway and take off. To know that we play that big of a part supporting the 43rd there and making sure that their pilots receive the training that they need is huge to me, because then that basically lets me know that we're doing our job to make sure that the Air Force is getting the best pilots in the world to be able to go out there and defend this country, and that's what it's all about. I love the Airmen. Being able to look back and say, okay, this guy got here, they had no idea what they were doing. Like, they weren't even confident enough to drive on the flight line because, you know, we didn't know if they would cut off a jet or if they do something crazy. So to see them progress from that manner, now they're out there, they're pumping gas. To see the knowledge that they're gaining, we're putting them through rotational training, like laboratory training, where they're learning how to test fuel, cryogenics training, where they're learning about different chemicals like liquid oxygen, liquid nitrogen, things like that. And to see their curiosity and the fact that they care, that's the biggest thing for me.
Now, Tyndall's flight line can be a busy place. On any given day, there are F-15s, 16s, 22s, T-38s, E-3s, and even commercial airliners taking off and landing within minutes of each other. And it's up to the air traffic controllers to keep everybody out of gridlock.
I'm Tech Sergeant Bryce Hamilton, and I'm Air Traffic Controller. Our role as the air traffic controllers here in the F-22 mission is kind of like the liaison between them training, because all pilots that fly the F-22 come through Tyndall in one way or another. They get all their flight training here. So we're the ones that enable them to go out there, do their different types of missions and stuff like that, practice flying in the pattern to get up to speed and hone their skills in order to go out into the actual combat when they need to go and fly for the Air Force.
Left on 2-3 left, right on Charlie, taxi.
Air traffic control is one of those unique jobs where every day you come in, it's going to be something different. For instance, here, us in the tower, We control all the airspace from to the surface up to 2,500, 2,600 feet. So all the airplanes that the RAPCON's talking to, they pass them to us and we control them, land them, take them off, all that stuff, and get them headed in the right direction out to go into the airspaces they're going to be working with. You just got to have confidence in yourself. And before, I would say I was more of a passive type person. This job has definitely made me grow, that I need to, you know, step out on that limb that you're not uncomfortable doing and do those things that I wasn't used to doing, and being strong, be that leader, make the right decisions. We all have our key to the puzzle, because everybody relies on each other in order to get the mission done.
The hard work of all these airmen now rests on the shoulders of one. To be trusted with this opportunity, pilots must prove themselves worthy.
The kid in me comes out every time I look at that jet. It's just a huge piece of machinery. It looks like a big toy. Yeah, every time I'm around it, seeing it fly through the air, it's just awe-inspiring to me. And there's still a little part of me that doesn't believe I'm going to get a shot to fly it. The excitement part is this is one of the coolest airplanes that I've ever seen in my life, and I'm just stoked to get a chance to fly it. The anxious part about it is ultimately the first time I fly it, all the responsibility will be on me. So a little bit of nerve-wracking, but I think it'll be worth it in the end. You know, I wanted to be a fighter pilot since I was a real little kid. I remember building models of F-16s and going to see air shows with the Blue Angels and the Thunderbirds, and I thought it was the coolest thing. My parents were both in aviation. My dad was a pilot. My mom was an air traffic controller. Brother, he's a pilot right now, and so aviation was always in the blood, but my path of life just took me a little bit different direction. I went to college and decided I wanted to be a cop, and then decided I wanted to go to law school, so I went to law school. And then at some point I wanted to serve, so I applied to be a JAG for the Air Force, and I got a summer internship out at Mountain Home Air Force Base, and watching F-15s fly by every single day. It rekindled the fire to try to be a fighter pilot. So
process for people to end up being a Raptor driver is long. Once you get your commission, after you have your 4-year degree, you have to get fortunate enough to be selected for a pilot slot. At that point, if you get the fighter track, you'll go for another 6 to 7 months, and you'll learn to fly the T-38, which is a supersonic trainer jet, and you'll learn the basics of flying faster and the basics of fighter-type flying, if you will.
Typical pilot training is a year. It took me 15 months longer than a year. Had a little medical hiccup in between T6s and T38s. I was diagnosed with cancer, and from there, it was an immediate grounding. I didn't think I was ever going to fly again. I wasn't sure really what to expect for the treatment itself.
Being a fighter pilot is one of the most physically and mentally demanding jobs in the world. Something as little as colorblindness can end your career before it even begins. For Captain Robert Hansen, his journey was just beginning when he found out he had cancer.
I didn't think there was anything wrong, to be quite honest. I had one small lump on my neck, and Robin's parents are in the medical field. Her dad's a doctor and mom's a nurse, and they both took a look at the lump and they said, hey, you should probably get it checked out. And
this was after I had said it like 3 times.
True,
I'm just saying.
True. Yeah. After the T6 phase was complete, I went and saw a doctor, and they sent me to a specialist who took some biopsies of the lump itself, and ultimately it was inconclusive until I'd started T-38, and I got right into the T-38 training, about to solo the jet, and the news finally came back that it was cancer.
It was rough, but knowing Rob, he never felt sorry for himself. He never got depressed or anything. It was what you would expect when you've been diagnosed with cancer, but he never really was like, oh, woe is me, and played, you know, this sad card. So it was a struggle for me to watch him deal with not knowing where he stood with the Air Force. He wanted to be a pilot. That was his dream. That's what he wanted to do, and now it wasn't necessarily in the cards. And that was really hard for him to watch that slip away, because you would see in his eyes it just wasn't, he just didn't know. And not knowing is the hardest part sometimes.
soon as the news dropped that I was diagnosed with cancer, the commander at that time, Lieutenant Colonel Moon, saw me into his office and said, hey, your primary job at this point is just to get healthy. He's like, I don't even want to see you until you are healthy and all the treatments are done. And so there's a regulation that said that I was supposed to be disenrolled after 6 months of being off of flying status, and they essentially said, hey, we're going to submit a waiver for this guy to get him back into pilot training, and we're not going to disenroll him until we hear back on that waiver. And that was a huge blessing for me too. So I had 15 months worth of time to wait for the waiver where I could continue to study, and they continued to give me jobs and make sure that I was gainfully employed with the Air Force so that I could indeed get reinstated into pilot training.
After 15 months of chemo and radiation treatment with his wife by his side, Captain Hansen beat cancer and went right back to pursuing his dream of flying.
It's been an emotional roller coaster in some ways. Really high, like high highs with the, you know, he almost got to solo the T-38 before he was diagnosed, and then he was diagnosed, so low. Then he beat the cancer, and then we didn't know if he was going to get back in, and that would have broken his heart, which would have broken my heart, and then he got back in, and then, you know, here we are. About to get really, really high again.
That assignment night was pretty cool too when
really
we finally,
emotional.
just the moment when it was finally my turn to get my assignment, and I'm in front of this big crowd, and there's some instructor pilots that are basically telling the crowd some of your mistakes in pilot training, and so you're just sitting there, and I had a little bit of a buzz going and a little bit anxious and excited, and the moment was finally about to arrive, and the SNR, the Senior National Representative, gets to announce what aircraft I get, and so.
It's close. I think the standards must have changed since the last time I flew. Yeah, I think that was 2011. It's like, who's in? Colonel Himmel, what's he going to fly? They have 22!
It was an amazing moment. I think until the next morning when I saw the patch on my flight suit that they gave me on assignment night, I don't think it really quite set in that I was going to get a shot to fly the Raptor.
Among the roughly 30 pilots that were in his class, some got F-15s, some got F-16s, and some got B-2 bombers. But Captain Hansen was the only one that got told that the F-22 would be his. But if you ask any maintainer, they'll say the jet isn't his, it's theirs.
Yes, sir. How's 8-9 doing?
How's 8-9 doing?
Yes, sir. When's that flying again?
8-9?
Yes, sir. That's my jet.
Well,
as a crew chief, you take pride in your jet, you know, because that's, at the end of the day, the crew chief owns that jet.
My jet is aircraft 107.
Aircraft 93.
Aircraft 81.
94.
72.
76.
91.
My jet is aircraft 405.
My plane specifically, it's beautiful. I call my jet the ugly duckling because it's not the prettiest plane, the LO's real damaged on it, but it never really breaks. So, you know, when another jet needs a part, they know they can can it from A9.
It's gonna show something about your personality and your character. If your jet's clean, looks good all the time. It'd be like on your car. If you notice your engine oil light's on, well, hey, maybe I need to add some engine oil, but you just keep driving, you know. You're neglecting your vehicle. You wouldn't do that to a sports car. Why would I do that to my jet out here?
Every time I'm put out on my jet, I wash it. I scrub down the whites. I wash any dirty part of the jet I can see.
No, actually, my first day on the flight line, Sergeant De La O, he showed me the importance of wiping down your whites. Took that to heart a little bit.
It's yours, you maintain it, you fix it, it's yours, your name's on it. Okay, you won't find that in the civilian world. Think about you as 18-year-old. Where was you at, 18-year-olds? Did you have the stakes as high as these men and women have out here?
APU!
And, you know, every day once you put a pilot in the air, that pilot's life is in your hands. So that's very gratifying, knowing that, you know, you're keeping somebody safe, even though you may not always think of it that way. They may not always think of it that way, but it's always that is the case. You know, you hold somebody's life in your work.
For Captain Hansen, it's taking the support of literally hundreds of airmen across a multitude of career fields over the last 6 years to get to this point. Finally, the day has arrived where Captain Hansen will take his first flight in the F-22 Raptor.
I'm excited for him because this is his, his dream, and it's being realized. He gets to do what he wants to do, and it's going to be emotional for me. I think his first flight, I'm going to be anxious because I just have to wait, and that waiting, like when he lands and okay, he's on the ground, it's cool, and then it'll slowly go away, and I'll feel better about it and stuff. But it's just going to be really, really cool to see him. And it's really cool to see him excel in what he's doing.
Air traffic control towers, ground crews, there's radar controllers out there. It's really a whole team concept to get the jet in the air. The pilot is literally just putting the aircraft through its paces of what it's supposed to be doing, but man, without the pilot, the jet can't fly, but without everybody else, there's no way that that pilot can even get to the jet.